Now, in dealing with and selling marine fish for all of my life, one thing that I've learned is that a cheap fish is a cheap fish. Just like a cheap product is very often inferior to a high quality product for many reasons. Could be the backup service, could be their contribution that supplier puts to the industry, advertising, so forth, the quality of the material that goes into the product, and all the rest of it. Now, fish are absolutely no different. So, I just want to give you a little rundown on why a cheap fish is a cheap fish, and why it's possible for you to see a shop selling a particular species for $200, and later on you might see another shop selling the same fish for $50. And it's very easy for you to say, oh, well, it's a rip-off. But when you start to understand the chain of custody, you realize it's absolutely not a rip-off. So you can buy cheap fish and have a good experience every now and then if you're lucky, but as you start to understand supply chain, it's very, very scary. And not only is it scary because of the lower quality of your fish, it's also very scary because of the impact that it will make on the environment and the wider community. So here's a little, I'm on the Cairns Marine website. Cairns Marine would definitely be the forerunner in regards to the quality of their chain of custody, which I'll explain in a minute. So let's just say that you're collecting fish from a third world country, whether it be Indonesia, whether it be Philippines, whether it be any of those sorts of countries. The way that it basically works is you get a whole bunch of guys with their little canoes, and they are catching fish in any way, shape or form they see fit to catch fish, many of them being very destructive ways. Then they catch their fish and they bring them to very primitive holding stations with little to no technology. Those holding stations often then get transferred to bigger holding stations and ultimately end up at the exporter. Very often in these third world countries, the quality of the exporter is awful. Absolutely terrible. So basically you can see how many times your fish has potentially changed hands by the time it gets to you. And sometimes there's more chink in the chain than there is displayed here. And every single time your fish move from one place to the next place, they're usually not fed for several days. So they fast the fish, so the fish don't produce as much waste in the bag. So to get from all the way here, all the way through there, and finally get into your tank, it's quite possible the fish has hardly been fed at all for the last month. Which obviously means that by the time you get the fish, it's completely challenged in its immune system. Now, the collection techniques of the third world is unfortunately terrible. Some of them use dynamite, some of them use various oils and so forth, and some of them use drugs such as cyanide. So what they'll do is they'll go and get their little cyanide dilution. They'll go and push that into water amongst the reef. Various fish will, as they say, go to sleep. Then they'll just collect them all in a bucket, take them to the surface, with very little regard to acclimatizing them, in regards to bringing them up out of the water, and also very little regard for the diver. The diver's down here, he's very often just biting his teeth on a cord that's supplying him with oxygen. So very little regard for the fish and very little regard for the diver. So supporting these sorts of techniques are far from ideal. Then the fish are often transported in terrible transport conditions. If you saw a fish from Cairns Marine, for example, it will be individually packed. It'll have medical grade oxygen. It'll often have other things in the water to neutralize possible ammonia buildup and so forth. The way they pack their fish is ideal, as opposed to the third world that just use what they've got, when they've got it, how they've got it. Then the fish are often collected in their canoes and bring to collection stations and held just like this. So often hold for several days. It will not be aerated. They may open the bag up every now and then, shake it around just to put a bit of oxygen in it if we're lucky. And then in this state, they will get transferred, often from one hand to another hand, not fed, not aerated, not filtered, just basically hanging in there trying to survive. And many of them are subject to poisons such as cyanide. So as the fish die in this state, the people will just chuck them out as they send to the next person. So what I was looking for there is the difference between this and Cairns Marine, because they've got that somewhere. But anyway, so for example, if you buy from God knows where and they sell to God knows who, then it finally makes its way to you. You have no accountability whatsoever or no idea what that fish has been through to get to you. Now, if you buy from a credible supplier, let's say one guy owns the collection station, one guy employs and manages all of the divers, and one guy exports those fish and is completely accountable for those fish and has state-of-the-art methods and state-of-the-art facilities, that will all come at a cost. So over a period of time, that particular person, let's use Cairns Marine as our figure, though there are other good quality suppliers around. Now these people tend to have very high costs. They tend to contribute a lot to the laws that govern their practices. They tend to have a lot more involvement with sustainable practices and government issues and so forth. They tend to have salespeople, marketing people, quality control people, qualified acquirists running each stage of their collection and their holding. They'll have certified divers. They will do lots of harm minimization practices, and over time that company will build up a reputation. Now that reputation is what allows that person or that collector to sell at a higher price, because if you have a state-of-the-art collector, it's possible that his costs or acquisition costs to actually get you that product could be 4 or 5 times higher than just some new Johnny on the street who is invested very little into his practices and his infrastructure. So at the end of the day, the better collectors with the better facilities, with the better techniques that really deserve our dollars cost more, and that's all there is to it. So when a retailer such as me goes to buy a fish, I go and buy a fish from Cairns Marine. I know the whole history of that fish. I can meet the divers. I know everything about that fish. So therefore, I'm very confident with that fish. So therefore, I'm very happy to pay more to buy the fish. But that also means that as a consumer, you need to pay more to buy the fish. Now, if I have some other dude that I don't know who he is, and I don't trust him, and he wants to sell me some fish, then the only thing that he can use against me is price. So the cheaper suppliers just try to offer cheaper and cheaper and cheaper prices, and that means that they're cutting their costs and creating more and more of a divide between the more expensive and the cheaper suppliers, because there's plenty of people out there that would really rather buy a $20 fish than a $120 fish. But when they learn what's involved or what that fish has been through to be a $20 fish, many people say, well, you know what, I'd rather pay more for my fish because I know that my fish has not been left in a bag for a few days. I know that my fish has been collected using sustainable practices. I know that my fish has been transported with respect and in the optimal methods. I know that I am receiving this fish in the highest quality that I can possibly have it. And all of this cannot be judged just on the look of the fish, because fish will do anything to look healthy. Because in the natural environment, if the fish do not look healthy, then other fish will kill them. And so therefore, if fish can trick each other, then they can definitely trick you as far as relying on what the fish physically look like. So anyway, just a few things to consider there. Actually, here's that other thing I was looking for. So what I want you to do is look at that. All the times the fish change hands, all the potentially unprofessional people involved just trying to do it as cheap as possible, as opposed to something like this, where you've got state-of-the-art boats collecting fish with state-of-the-art techniques, going to a state-of-the-art facility, then getting sent to you as quickly and professionally as possible. So in Australia, it goes straight from Cairns Marine straight to the retailer. So once again, all the fish are net caught, no drugs getting used, no damage to the environment. All the fish are not collected in bags and just taken to the surface. The way that they're taken to the surface is very deliberate, and they're all kept in aerated containers. Just all these measures that are done to reduce stress on the animal. You've got professional marine biologists looking over it all and running it. So anyway, my point for this video is that a cheap fish is a cheap fish. And as a hobbyist, the only way that we're ever going to stamp out all of this cowboy crap that goes on in our industry is if we vote with our dollars. If we try to understand who we're buying our fish from, we try not to support these sorts of practices, because these practices are unsustainable for the industry, for you, because the fish are likely to die, and it's also unsustainable for the poor uneducated divers that are doing this stuff. So I've actually spoken personally to divers in the Philippines and so forth that collect using these techniques, and they'll tell you about it with pride. They think the fish go to sleep and the fish wake up fine. So the stories that these greedy exporters are telling these divers is often completely criminal, because just as these divers are going there spraying chlorine and spraying cyanide, poisoning the fish, they're also poisoning themselves, because believe it or not, the life expectancy of a fish collector in third world countries is actually very, very low. They die. Anyway, just a fair bit for you to think about there. My recommendation is when you buy a fish, you ask, where did the fish come from? If the shop doesn't care, or doesn't want you to know, or doesn't proudly tell you, then I would really hesitate to buy the fish. At Majestic Aquariums, what we actually do is divide our systems into suppliers.